When Charles Lamb first met Wordsworth in July of 1797 in Nether Stowey, Wordsworth was at the height of his poetic love affair with Samuel Taylor Coleridge. As we know from our early studies of Wordsworth and Coleridge, the two men convened in Nether Stowey in 1797, 1798, and took their walks among Quantock Hills, and there constructed one of the greatest collaborations in the history of English, if not all literature, called Lyrical Ballads. Lamb, of course, had undergone a terrible calamity in September of 1796, and his very good friend Coleridge, whom he had known since the age of 7, consistently invited Lamb out to Nether Stowey, saying, "Come, you will be healed here by the natural world. You need to get out of the city," even though Lamb loved the city. "You need to get out of the city. You need to get away from where the day of horrors occurred." Well, Lamb had a hard time getting off work, and Lamb didn't have much money, but finally by the late summer of 1797, he was able to make his way to the dwelling of Coleridge. Well, he stayed about a week, and as he wrote soon after returning, he didn't have much to say. He was fairly quiet, and he felt that his quiet was deemed awkward by those present. He was ashamed, he was embarrassed. But indeed, probably Lamb simply could not get a word in edgewise. Coleridge, even on a down day, would talk anyone's ear off. He was the most famous talker and the most prodigious talker of his generation, if not any. But there, with his new poetic god, Wordsworth, there would be very little silence in which to insert one's opinion. So Lamb sat by and listened to Wordsworth and Coleridge talk. He also took a walk or two among the Quantock Hills with the two poets, as well as Dorothy, sister of William. And of course, we know the famous walk where Coleridge himself was unable to join. His wife Sarah had spilled hot milk on his foot, and he was confined to the lime tree bower owned by his neighbor, the tanner/radical thinker Tom Poole. So Coleridge imagines Dorothy and William and Lamb out traipsing over the landscape, and we get to see these imaginings recorded in this lime tree bower, my prison, where Coleridge refers to Lamb as gentle-hearted Charles more than once. Charles hated this. Charles wrote Coleridge, "Do not ever call me gentle Charles Lamb again. If anything, I am drunken, I am cockeyed, I am not shaven, I am unwashed, I am of a bitter disposition." Lamb hated sentimentality in any form. In any case, Lamb left Nether Stowey having certainly made the acquaintance of Wordsworth, but the two didn't seem to hit it off very well at all. In 1801, well, I should say probably a bit earlier, probably late 1800. I'm not quite sure the chronology, but by late January 1801, Lamb had read the latest edition of Lyrical Ballads. Wordsworth had sent it to him, and Lamb wrote to Wordsworth this very long letter where he praises certain poems voluminously. He loved the Lucy poems, for instance. He loved Tintern Abbey, for instance. He loved Cumberland Beggar, for instance. But he criticized Wordsworth for Wordsworth's dogmatic propensity. We talked about that, where sometimes Wordsworth's poems feel less like poems and more like arguments in verse. So Lamb pointed this out. Lamb also thanked Wordsworth for his invitation. Wordsworth had invited Lamb to come up to the Lake District, to Grasmere, to Dove Cottage, where, as we know, William and Dorothy were now living. And Lamb said no. He said, rather shockingly, probably, from Wordsworth's point of view, "I don't care if I never see another mountain in my life." And then Lamb, in this letter, January 30, 1801, lays out his first piece, in my opinion, of really great writing, where he talks about how London is to him as the Lake District is to Wordsworth, basically establishing the notion of an urban romantic, someone who can approach the urban landscape in the same way that Wordsworth would approach a natural landscape. So listen to what Lamb writes to Wordsworth in this letter. "London, is for me the lighted shops of the Strand and Fleet Street, the innumerable trades and tradesmen and customers, coaches, wagons, playhouses, all the bustle and wickedness round about Covent Garden, the very women of the town, the watchmen, drunken scenes, rattles, life awake if you awake at all hours of the night, the impossibility of being dull in Fleet Street, the crowds, the very dirt and mud, the sun shining upon houses and pavements, the print shops, the old bookstalls, parsons cheapening books, coffee houses, steams of soups from kitchens, the pantomimes, London itself a pantomime and a masquerade. All these things work themselves into my mind and feed me without the power of satiating me. The wonder of these sights impels me into night walks about her crowded streets, and I often shed tears in the motley Strand from fullness of joy at so much life. All these emotions must be strange to you, William Wordsworth. So are your rural emotions to me. So this is a new model of Romanticism, one we have not seen yet. So Lamb here becomes one of the first instances of what the French poet Charles Baudelaire in the middle of the 19th century would call the flâneur, the idler, the person who just walks around the city for the sake of walking around the city. He's not going anywhere. He just loves to take in the lyricism of the street, the rhythms, the surprises, the shocks, the pantomime. One who walks the street for aesthetic reasons. That is Lamb, who is a great walker. He would sometimes walk up to 20 miles a day just because he loved the city so much. Now it's interesting to note that about a year after this letter, Wordsworth was making his way back from France, where he'd gone to talk to Annette Villon about taking care of her and his daughter financially. He needed to do this, he felt, before marrying Mary Hutchinson. And on his way back through London, he met Lamb, who had just returned, strangely enough, from Keswick, which is near Grasmere, Keswick, where Lamb had been visiting Coleridge. And Lamb had actually gone to Wordsworth's house and he wasn't there. So the two meet in London. And Lamb walks Wordsworth around London. And Wordsworth seems to find a new appreciation for the city. There's some passages in the prelude, certainly that denigrate the city as a hellish place, but there are also these lyrical moments where he describes moving from Fleet Street, one of the more crowded and bustling streets in all of London, into the gardens of the Inner Temple, the tranquil gardens of the Inner Temple where all the lawyers are trained, which is where Charles Lamb grew up. So Charles Lamb ultimately ended up influencing Wordsworth's sense of the city, just as Wordsworth, through his interaction with nature, influenced Lamb's interaction with his beloved London.